there's a few different areas, I think, that where the change needs to happen. So one of them, as I've mentioned, is about the joined up policy. So it's about making sure that the policymakers are in the conversation, that the supply of sugar is in the conversations around the sugar consumption reduction aims.
Hello, morning, everybody. I'm Luke Goddard of Zucker. I'm delighted to be with you today for this Sugar-Free Summit. And a bit of background about me, I, for the last sort of 10 or 15 years, have been an organic farmer in the UK, although a lot of everything that I've produced has been around production of meat through livestock. I've got a very keen interest in the sugar side of things, and I'm the co-founder of Zucker. And Zucker is a sugar alternative, and obviously fits in very well with us looking at the UK becoming sugar-free. So that's me. Can I pass over to my co-host?
Hiya, my name's Krystyna Woroniecka. I'm a project manager at Feedback, which in practice means I campaign on our sugar beet programme, which is all about reducing the production of sugar beet in the UK and the imports of cane as well. I also work on other projects involving animal feed and whatnot. I've been at Feedback for 6 years. I've got a background in energy, in environmental and waste issues. And of course, Feedback is traditionally known as a food systems campaign organisation that works on food waste in supply chains. So that's how I got here. And now we do a huge range of other campaigns. We work a lot on fish and fish feed and fish farming. We work on food waste still, we work on sugar, we work on some community sort of grassroots level projects as well, all over the country. So that's me, and I'm very grateful to be here.
Yeah, excellent. And obviously one of the things we wanted to talk about is the impact on sugar beet production in the UK and the impact on the environment. Is that something we can kick off with that, maybe?
Absolutely, yeah. So shall I start by giving us a bit of an overview on
yes, please. Right.
environmental issues? So the big one is soil. So we basically, all of our industrial produced crops in the UK, they do have an impact on soil. And that's through the damage caused by the machinery, ploughing, fertiliser. There's characteristics of all of these crops. So before we even consider the soil loss that's a result of sugar beet directly, there's already 2.9 million tonnes of soil that's eroded in British fields each year from machinery and ploughing. But then on top of this sort of baseline, if you like, of soil erosion, root crops, which of course sugar beet is a root crop, they cause further damage because the soil clings to the crop when it's pulled out of the ground at harvest time. And then the third sort of prong, the triple whammy, if you like, of sugar beet is that it's harvested in autumn and winter when the soils are wetter, which means that the soil is more easily compacted or stuck to the equipment or to the beets. And so the soil loss during harvest is 4 times that of potatoes, for example, which is another root crop, but it's not harvested in the same way at the same time. So I could keep going on the detail of this soil loss. Basically, 500,000 tonnes of topsoil from the UK's best fields in East Anglia. It comes out with the sugar beet each year. So it contains the nutrients that are beneficial to growing our food, as well as the beneficial soil life that's essential. And that all comes out with the harvest. And then it's actually bagged up by the UK's sole processor of sugar beet, who are called British Sugar. And it's sold as topsoil for amenities like golf courses. So in other words, that means the UK's best soils, they leave the field and the food system forever. And this matters because soil is a non-renewable resource. It actually takes 200 to 400 years to form 1 centimetre of soil. But it can take thousands of years to recover if the fertility is lost. So why does this matter? Well, actually, this loss of soil can affect our future ability to grow food. I've mentioned that that sugar beet is grown in East Anglia, and these are also some of the most affected soils where most of the soil erosion has taken place. And then it's taken from these affected soils from these fields to one of the 4 British sugar refineries. An interesting point here to note, by the way, is the name British Sugar is a bit misleading to some people because they're actually a Canadian-owned multinational who own other things like Primark and a load of other food brands, as well as cane sugar companies from around the world. So they're not a British company as well, but I know that a lot of people hear the name and feel quite protective. So
Yes, and the packaging as well, of course, has British flags all over it to show that it is, a British produced product. But I actually, yes, it is quite shocking if people knew about that, and obviously it is slightly misleading to obviously call it British sugar. But the thing that we were talking about earlier as well is the challenges. Are there alternatives for the farmers other than the beet production? Some of the farmers I know are switching away from beet production. And what do you feel about the other things what other alternatives are there from a production perspective, but also monetary, perspective?
So this is the thing about sugar beet. It does offer farmers a few different benefits. One of them, we call it a break crop, which means that between growing cereals, basically, it's intensive to the soil in different ways. So it doesn't require the same inputs that growing the cereals does, but then it does pull out more of the soil at the end of the harvest. So it challenges the soil in different ways. So farmers need to use it in the rotation. They need to use something other than a cereal in the rotation. And then there's different things that they could use. One of the reasons that farmers use sugar beet is because of this contract. So because British Sugar are a monopoly refiner, they negotiate with the National Farmers Union Sugar Branch every year on the price of sugar, and it's set in advance. So, and then farmers agree the contract, the number of hectares or acres that they're going to grow of sugar beets with British Sugar in advance, and that allows them to have this security. So before they even plant, they know what money they're going to get for it, basically. And for people who don't know much about farming, that doesn't sound that remarkable, but often farmers will carry the entire risk of the crop that they grow, which means that they will be planting it and then they won't know until they harvest it what the market is going to be for that product. And it's extremely volatile. And you might have seen in the news recently, like, for example, there's an onion farmer in Norfolk who's giving away, I can't remember how many acres or hectares of onions it is for free because of the heat wave. So they've not been able to get a market for their onions. And that kind of story is so not uncommon. So a crop that offers that kind of guaranteed price is really unusual. So it's a real symptom of needing it. It really demonstrates that we need better markets, a wider variety of markets available for farmers. And we need to think about what policymakers can do to make it easier for our farmers to access different markets.
The other thing, I was going to sorry to interrupt there, but I was going to come in also with the fact that there have been 2 or 3 years of a lot of very wet weather that's affected the beet production. And there are obviously the challenges with yellow virus and things that have also reduced the production. And I know farmers have said we are looking at other things, because if we're having the price being driven, if the price is driven down by British Sugar, so it becomes less attractive because the pre-agreed rates are reduced, plus a lot of wet weather, plus things like the yellow virus, there are these challenges that the farmers face. But there are farmers that are moving away from sugar beet and growing other crops, which is very, which is obviously good from a sugar production perspective. But also it's interesting to talk about perhaps why there's such a huge demand for sugar.
Interesting. Just coming back to the point that you made, I realised that I do actually make British Sugar out to sound like this hero, but you have pointed out the price that they offer is actually just not that high. And for a lot of farmers, like you say, they are completely fed up with dealing with them. So yes, although the risk is managed, the price is not always good. So
no. And it's come down and down and down, and the farmers are looking at it and saying, well, now we're getting, X per ton, and we were getting Y, and now it really having to look at it. But obviously, where the farmers made such a huge investment in things like machinery, etc., sometimes I think that is a challenge, and looking at the change. But as you say, having a price pegged at before you've actually even planted is something that obviously people will be interested, or farmers will be interested in. But I think certainly if there are the alternatives, and the alternatives were things like carrots and peas, things that are healthier for us, that is some of the things that the farmers that have been that have just moved away from the beet production are now enjoying those, those increased profits from that. So yeah, I think that was something that, obviously I wanted to mention. But yes, the demand in the UK is very high because and I know that there was an article saying that they were hoping to increase sugar beet production so that they could get it into more foods. And I believe there is this stealth thing of using sugar to bulk products and to get it into us as consumers consuming more of it, and particularly post-pandemic. I think that is a really big risk of us. Obviously things like tooth decay and things like diabetes. These are all impacts that follow on from the overproduction. Can you talk about the overproduction numbers in the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, these are all really interesting points. So we produced in the UK, well, our total supply, so this comes from sugar beet and from sugar cane that we import, is around 3 times the WHO's maximum safe consumption level for the nation. So over half of that is produced here, and then another 500,000 tons or something is imported as sugarcane by Tate and Lyle, who again are one of these companies that's it's another monopoly. It's trying very hard to increase both its share of the market and to grow the market overall. So there is a lot invested in trying to increase the amount of sugar that's being supplied. I think what's really interesting to remember is that the sugar demand has been created. So it's quite well documented historically. For example, in the US, the sugar industry actions that they've taken, both to create the demand through the number of things that sugar is in and the amount of sugar in each food, but also to systematically undermine any of the health disputes about sugar. And they continue to do that. It was quite interesting in 2019 when we met up with British Sugar, for example. And I hadn't had any sort of face-to-face interaction with them before this. So the first time that I heard them deny that there are any ill health links between sugar and ill health, I was quite astounded. But it's very much still the line that they peddle, is that there's nothing special about sugar that's unhealthy. Yes.
That's surprising. Yes, but I don't think that people or the public are naive in that area, are they? I think a lot of people accept that sugar does create lots of health issues.
Definitely, but I think it feeds into the government's sort of reluctance to step into. So, for example, the new trade deals that have that will allow greater sugar volumes into this country from Australia. The reluctance to deal with sugar in anything other than a very focused obesity strategy. I don't think that they're willing to see the bigger picture, or it's quite convenient, I suppose, with the industry putting forward these health disputes, because it legitimizes their lack of action through other departments, I suppose, and have this disjointed policy approach where the supply is 3 times what's the safe amount, and then yet we're trying to focus the obesity strategy to be productive. And of course it can't be, because we've got this huge amount of sugar, and if there's going to be that sugar, it's going to find somewhere to go. So it doesn't really matter what you're telling people in terms of how they as individuals need to be healthy and shop healthier. If the sugar is there and there's all this money invested in it getting eaten, then the marketing, we do know, we're not naive about the power of marketing, that will ensure that the food gets eaten.
Yes, absolutely. And following on from that, actually, one of the things that happened recently is the government did a U-turn with regard to the advertising on television and obviously where there are policies that, it's an uphill struggle where the governments are doing things like allowing the pesticides that kills bees because of the yellow virus that hits the sugar beet, and it was British Sugar that lobbied the government to get that U-turn as well. So it's coming from two angles, really. The government are obviously changing policy in terms of banned substances that kill bees, and also changing their mind on things like the advertising that was going to be stopped a year or so ago around the watershed, and then that was changed around 6 or 8 weeks ago, where they said they're no longer going to continue with that, and that was obviously something that makes it, as you talked about in terms of the policy, getting policy change, but then you may take one step forward and you're sort of kind of coming back when those things are, you're not getting that change within the government. Is there anything else that you can add to that in terms of driving policy change and what people could do, or what we should be thinking about in terms of driving any change in that area?
Yeah, there's a few different areas, I think, that where the change needs to happen. So one of them, as I've mentioned, is about the joined up policy. So it's about making sure that the policymakers are in the conversation, that the supply of sugar is in the conversations around the sugar consumption reduction aims. Because at the moment, those are very siloed conversations, and we've got the production and the supply is being dealt with by Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, and then we've got and also by trade, and then we've got the obesity strategy is like sorted out by the Department of Health, and those conversations between the two are not happening. So one of the things we're trying to do as part of our feedback campaign is just to bring those people together and just to make it so that that's no longer acceptable to be thinking about obesity strategies that don't talk about supply. So what else needs to happen? So then that's part of it, but there's also a whole bit about support for farmers, and about we at Feedback want to see more small-scale sustainable horticulture farms. So that means we'd like to see a lot more financial support for community farms and gardens, because these things provide the solutions to everything we're talking about in such a holistic way. It's not just about providing an increase of fruit and veg and sort of lower amounts of processed food. It's also about having a source of community and well-being and space for nature, because being part of your local community farm can really be, it can be somewhere that you go and get your veg and you know the person who's selling it to you. But it can also be somewhere where you volunteer every week and you meet the other people in your neighborhood, and it's got something that you and your kids can go to together, and that your kids grow up realizing where food comes from and just meeting other people. In fact, food bit can become a bit background because it can be such a joyous thing to do. But these community farms and gardens, they're quite small scale. They are on the rise, but they don't qualify for agricultural support because they're too small. Their actual size is too small, despite being very productive in terms of their yields. So agricultural support payments do need to be widened to include small-scale sustainable horticulture. But there's other things as well that can be done to improve to support small-scale horticulture. For example, like capital grants for things like boreholes, because one of the obstacles to transitioning to horticulture away from field-scale arable crops like cereals is about irrigation. So if you can get a source of water for farmers, then that can open up their options, as well as facilitating more peer-to-peer support and that kind of thing, so that farmers who have managed to transition away from, for example, producing animal feed and sugar beets towards more towards vegetables for direct human consumption, particularly those that are doing direct sales, because that can be a really interesting way of people, of farmers improving their incomes. But it's a big jump for a lot of farmers who haven't done that before, and they might have been working for generations on one farm and not doing that kind of thing, it can be really risky when you've got absolutely no financial cushioning to try and make any kind of big change, especially in the uncertain policy space that we're in at the moment with the agricultural transition. So yeah, there's a lot more that the government could do in terms of being much more clear. But for us, it's really about changing the conversation about food and making it something that's celebratory, community-based, inclusive. We do also need to talk about incomes because, of course, it's only people who can afford to go to these community farms and be involved are the people who aren't working however many jobs and don't have any spare time each week. So we've been taught, feedback, we talk a lot about cheap food being not part of the solution. So we really need to pay our farmers a little bit more in order for them to not, for them to be able to choose sustainable farming practices. And for us to pay them a little bit more, food needs to not be so cheap. It's been cheap for a long time as a way of placating us for having very low incomes. But that's got to stop so that we can allow farmers to farm in the way that they want to farm, in a way that's better for our biodiversity and better for our soil.
Yes, absolutely. Well, one of the things talking about the community farming side as well is, as you know, the mental health as well is, for everybody post-pandemic, that's key. The other thing that's great, I think, for children being involved in that thing is actually watching things like the plants and the vegetables growing, watering them and getting all of the benefit. As we're both parents and we know our children love growing everything from tomatoes to everything else. But there are things, and it's something that I've worked on over the years, and that is where I've pulled a spreadsheet together, and and everybody that's got access to a computer or a laptop or something can do, and have a look at what your production is, and look at some of the vegetables perhaps that you could actually grow, the ones that are more expensive at the supermarket. Things like my son and I enjoyed making tomato ketchup because we had a glut of tomatoes, and they're the things that are actually quite expensive to buy at the shops, but you can make and enjoy your own sort of homegrown ketchup that you've made in a saucepan by picking those tomatoes and coming home and doing that. So there's a whole raft of things that are beneficial to that side of things. But also the thing about it is that I think it is important for us to be aware of how much sugar is actually in some of the things that people are buying. And I know that there are some of the things like the ketchup producers that are reducing sugar, and it's just the natural sugars that are from those vegetables that are then going into fruit or vegetables that are then actually going into things like ketchup that then aren't packed. And we touched earlier on in terms of things like yogurt, and people being aware that something that is reduced fat does probably mean increased sugar. So there's obviously a whole educational side of things around that. Again, touching on the pandemic and post that, where a lot of people have perhaps gained a couple of pounds, one being a bit sedentary. The thing we don't need really in our diets now is sugar.
Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, I think coming back to the community farm thing and the mental health thing, I think one of the other things about the pandemic is about this, how rubbish we were all feeling, and how there was this isolation and this lack of fulfillment and so on, and this chronic stress around us all the time, and this anxiety. And these factors are huge risk factors in becoming overweight. So anything that brings those down and brings us back together again and brings us back into the garden. Or another thing about growing your own food or having kids exposed to growing food is that I noticed that my daughter will eat fresh veg if she can pick it off the plant way more than she will if it's then back at home or if it's coming from the supermarket, which I don't quite understand, but there's clearly something innate there where they're much more interested in picking something.
Pick it and eat it. And they also say there's a definite correlation between children eating things that they have produced or made at home. They're much more likely to actually eat something they've made rather than something that has been made for them. And they've said, well, I'm not really sure where that's come from. But yes, picking a tomato from the vine and eating it is so much nicer than buying a loose tomato in the shop. I absolutely. I think that is something that is, is absolutely key to, the happiness and well-being for everybody. definitely. The other thing that I wanted just to also talk about is that, yes, is there anything else we can that you think that we could do going forward as far as communities in terms of lobbying? Is there any? Do you have any views on that? Oh, the other thing I was just thinking about in terms of the guard side of things is that I know that you've looked at the cost, because the cost of sugar isn't just the buying per kilo of it, but it's all the knock-on costs with things like trips to the dentist. And I know that there were some numbers that were put together in terms of what those costs are and how much it's costing each sector of the public in terms of things like dental care, and also obviously the cost of diabetes to the UK.
Yeah, I don't know if I've got these off the top of my head.
Okay, no, hopefully.
One of the statistics on dental care that was quite interesting was it was to do with the annual agricultural subsidies that ended up with sugar beet farmers. And this was under the area-based payment scheme, so where farmers were paid according to how big their farm was. So when that was calculated as to how much money was going for the whole fields of sugar beet, if that makes sense, it ended up being exactly the same as the amount that was spent extracting children's teeth for teeth decay or something. So there's a clear, a nonsense there about, we might be supporting one thing and then it's costing the public purse in another way, and in a way that's clearly really bad for us. I haven't got the obesity financial statistics.
Sure. But it's one of yes, I know, and it's one of those things that I think the NHS and people that have worked in the NHS have said is that diabetes is probably the number one expenditure in the UK, and obviously there's the correlation there between sugar consumption, us coming out of the pandemic, and the type of diets that we've been on, and now the sort of the crisis around the obesity and the knock-on effect of that being diabetes, and then people obviously suffering, but also suffering, for anybody that is, having to manage either their own diabetes or their child's. It's very stressful, and that daily routine of something that you're then on, and for a life, perhaps the medication. And that is something that I think we, as a nation, should be taken very seriously, because it's not a thing that's going to go away unless we make a change within the dietary side and stop, obviously, the consumption of sugar.
Exactly. And I think this kind of touches on this suffering and this sort of conversation around a burden, emotional burden. It touches on the need for this to be something that we have to deal with together, because if we have it just as something that we as individuals continue to take the responsibility for, which has been the sort of official line for quite a long time. And again, I would say that that's definitely been in the interests of certain large companies and industries for it to be that way, to say that, we're just providing a service, we're just providing yummy foods so that and people can have them if they want them. Well, we can't go on saying that this is an individual responsibility. The evidence no longer supports that. We know now that having this availability of this food makes it really, really difficult for people to always choose a healthy option that might take more time to make. One of the things that I'm finding now as a mom is that I've got this 3-year-old. We try really hard at home because of sort of other health issues we try really hard to have a whole foods diet where we make stuff at home, and we include so many different food groups and trying to be really varied in the number of fruit and veg and whatever that she eats. And then we go out and we want to socialize as well, obviously, and other people will bring their snacks, and I don't ever like to tell my daughter that she can't have some food that other people are eating, because I don't want food to be something associated with deprivation. I think food is celebratory. And there can be treats and everything in moderation and so on. But we are constantly surrounded by these various processed foods that have got sugar and other ingredients kind of hidden in. And you're trying so hard, it can take such a huge amount out of you. I mentioned the medical condition, so the emotional burden in managing that, and in managing the shopping and the making of the food to make it as good as possible, is huge for parents who, like, they're already snowed under with other stresses and childcare and going to work and, making ends meet and things. So we've got to make this easier for people, to make it so that people have more time for whole foods. Again, addressing the income issue, and also making processed foods just something that's not as attractive in the supermarket compared to whole foods. And the retailers have a responsibility. Actually, we're bringing a report out on this in the next month or so. So look out for the feedback report on the supermarket and retailer responses to our sugar questionnaire that we sent them, because it's become very clear that they do not see it as their responsibility to sell less sugar overall. They're willing to take a lot of credit for reducing the amount of sugar in some individual products, but they will not consider themselves responsible for reducing the overall amount of sugar that they sell. And they would be quite happy for the overall amount of sugar that's being sold to keep increasing. So as long as we have that issue, then we can't possibly reduce the amount of sugar that we as a nation are eating.
Right. Okay. That sounds as if perhaps that if they were to listen perhaps to the consumers more as well, I mean, that might be something that could be a change driven through the consumer side. Maybe consumers saying we would prefer things with less sugar in. I don't know it'd be very interesting to read your report on that and see what they've actually got to say. Because obviously one of the things they're going to be very conscious of is the falling margin and sales at checkout as a result of having less sugar. Would people transition to another supermarket if there was higher, more sugary products there? That's an interesting conversation perhaps for another day, but I'd be very interested to look at that. But that's great. Well, thank you very much for your time. Yes, it's been very insightful, very, very interesting to hear everything about the impact on the environment and things that we could be doing, and other things that as consumers and people within that will be very interested to hear about with this obviously the time that we spent today talking about it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Luke. It's been a real pleasure.
Okay, and I'll speak with you soon. Take care.
Yeah,
okay.
Take care.
Bye for now. And so, can you touch on sugarcane? Is that a viable option to switch?
This is a really interesting question, because obviously we talk a lot about the problems of sugar beet, and therefore the natural conclusion is perhaps by some people that we ought to just then import sugar cane instead. And it might be true that we have an obligation to carry on importing a little bit of sugar, or doing something to support some of the least developed countries that we, or ex-colonies that we have an obligation to. I might have screwed this up a bit. Hang on, sorry.
All right. So can you tell me about the sugar cane? Is that a viable option?
Really interesting question. The short answer is generally we want less beet and less cane. A lot of the environmental effects of sugar beet, we also see those similar effects on soil with sugar cane. It happens in a different way. It's an intensively grown crop again. And a lot of the countries that are growing sugar cane might have lower standards for pesticide and herbicide use, for example, and fertilizers. So actually a lot of those inputs might be even higher, and the water use, for example, the nitrogen and so on, it's all higher for sugar cane. So we don't want to switch to sugar cane. We think that would be just offshoring some of these impacts on soil to countries that might even face higher stresses than us on their food security. So no, that wouldn't be a great idea. It might be possible that we do carry on with some of our obligations to the least developed countries that we've historically imported sugar from, and where we have a colonial legacy that we need to take responsibility for. So, for example, in the African, Caribbean, and Pacific producing countries. But that could be a minimal amount. And it doesn't need to, we certainly don't have a responsibility to be importing sugarcane from countries like Brazil or Australia as per the new trade deal and so on. And that's not the answer to this. The answer is to overall to consume a lot less, to supply a lot less sugar.
One of the things that we didn't touch on as well is there any way that we can lobby government for an increase in sugar taxes, not just just in terms of what they're selling in the supermarket? I mean, that's obviously going to be something that's been going to be heavily resisted by British Sugar, and obviously British Sugar do have quite a strong pull with the government, hence allowing things like the insecticide being used. Is there any way that we can increase, or would approaching the government with regard to, this is the impact on the NHS, therefore the cost of that should really be met through a tax that's levied on the sugar? Is that something that do you have a view on that?
Absolutely. So I think sugar, the conversation around a sugar reformulation tax needs to stay alive and strong. That was obviously the recommendation from Beet's food strategy. The government turned their noses up a bit at it and claimed that the weight of the tax, so the tax incidence, as it were, would fall on the consumers, and it would push the price up of foods during a cost of living crisis. Now, that's not necessarily true. That's not happened with the soft drinks levy. It worked very successfully to make sure that the price did not fall on the consumers, and that the manufacturers instead chose to reformulate. So that's how these reformulation taxes work. They incentivize reducing the amount of sugar, and then as a result, the price to the consumer, the tax does not essentially come into effect because they've reformulated, and so then the consumer is protected from the price change. So it shouldn't. The cost of living crisis, if anything, is a reason to make it easier for people to choose healthier foods. It's not a reason to step back from stronger legislation. Another thing we can do is the mandatory target. So we've been talking to supermarkets, and they, of course, are not interested in the idea of mandatory sugar reduction targets. But we think that mandatory action is the real way to go with industry and with retailers, because the voluntary initiatives have not been working. So certainly mandatory targets and taxes, I think, are a much better option than the failing policies that we've seen so far.
That's interesting. Yeah. So thank you for that. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I know, I believe I have worked with retailers before in some of the supermarkets, and they, and I know that they do have feedback that comes from customers. And I also believe that over time, where they've had things like the traffic light system on things, that has been beneficial. And I know that some of the supermarkets have reduced things like the salt content on some of the ready meals and things. And I think that that's actually a change that's actually been driven through the consumers' slight change over the years in salt reduction, and actually things that are becoming less palatable because of the higher salt content. And it'd be nice to know, or that might change as a result of sugar. If people are becoming, their taste is slightly changing, and there's a reduction of sugar as a result of people's desire to reduce sugar. I don't know whether that's likely to happen, or whether that's something that is a bit of a way off in the future. But yeah, thank you so much for that. That's wonderful. Thank you.